So, and I talk about that to a lot of kids, I mean, kids, especially when you're confused and when you really don't have a light that you're working towards, you don't have a very specific goal that you're fortunate really if you do have something like that you could work towards, and it can be your life's work. That usually doesn't happen too often. It's a struggle until you find it. And I think the thing that's embedded in that struggle are the attributes that you develop personally as you move towards authenticity. And those attributes are tenacity, stick-to-itiveness, strategic thinking, questioning, perseverance.
All right. Well, welcome, everybody. I'd like to thank everybody for joining the Loving Our Life's Work podcast, where we share examples of courage, perseverance, triumph in the business world and in life. Our guests are not the run-of-the-mill business and charity leaders. They're examples of people who are actively living their life's purpose, and they've come to share their vision of their life's work with us for the sole purpose that you may learn through this experience to give yourself permission to live yours. We have a special guest with us today, Bill Winkler, serial entrepreneur, a guy who is not shy about living his purpose, finding it, plugging in what his passions are in life and what life has dealt him, and giving back in ways that can hardly be explained. Bill, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
An honor for me to be here, Adam. Absolutely.
Well, Bill, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what it is that you do?
Presently.
Okay.
Well, what I do now, and I have been doing for about the last probably 13 years. No, actually, it's longer than that. Because I've been doing consulting work, and I work with nonprofit organizations. I'm also involved in working with a number of scientists, clinical scientists. I do a lot of, with the nonprofit organizations, what I try to do is I try to help them understand that being a nonprofit is a wonderful thing because you do wonderful work in the community in so many different areas. All these nonprofits do that kind of thing. But the thing that's most important to understand as a nonprofit is that you have to survive. And in order to survive, you have to run your operation, not only like a nonprofit that's mission driven, but like a business that is responsible for managing the books and managing the money, so that you're going to be alive at the end of the next year and alive at the next 5 years, et cetera. And you're going to be able to continue to do your mission. And so what I do with these nonprofits is I work with them, usually one-to-one. I work with their development departments, and I help their development departments develop strategies to work with prospective donors. And usually it's not just working with prospective donors, but it's sort of like teaching development people how to establish relationships, because developing relationships is primary in terms of what development work is all about. That's the foundation for doing really, really good resourceful development work, is to establish relationships. Establishing relationships is really kind of an interesting phenomenon, because you really have to, first of all, like people, number one. And number two, you have to be interested in what their lives are all about, because remember, it's not just about your life, it's about their lives. And they are where they are, just like you are where you are over the course of time. So their life is a video, just like your life is a video, and you both arrive at this particular place. And so finding out about what their video looks like is really, really important. That helps you establish what the beginnings of a really fundamental relationship is all about. And it helps you understand from the perspective of somebody that's working with a nonprofit, how these folks see themselves in the picture of what your nonprofit represents and what its mission is all about. And during the course of getting to know them, you'll find that out. And so I think that's really that's what I do right now. And that's what I do with a lot of the nonprofits that I work with. On the clinical side, working in the science area, what I try to do is I try to take a look at researchers that do wonderful work in research and in clinical work and developing new drugs, etc. And I try to help them take what they're doing in those laboratories and bring it out to the general public, from bench to clinic to the general public. And I help them find the money to make that happen, because not every one of these researchers is funded to the fullest extent that they need to be funded. So there has to be other ways to develop cash flow for them so that they can continue to do their work. And those are areas that I've been interested in all my life. I've been interested in science, and I've been interested in the human side, the relationship side, which kind of, if you look back over my history, there's a thread of all of that stuff that runs through many of the things that I've done over the course of my life. So that's kind of like what I'm doing right now, along with the fact that I'm talking to somebody that I've known since, I don't know, when was it? It was in the 80s, Adam, is that right?
It was in the early 90s.
In the early 90s, okay. So Adam and I have known each other for a long time. He was a young guy that came into one of the businesses that I was involved in. And it was actually, he looked like everybody else that came through the door, every young kid that came through the door. But eventually what I came to understand was that he was just a little bit different. And that little difference was something that caught my eye, caught my attention, because in conversations that I had with Adam during the course of him working with me, I discovered that he was a thinker. And it was always really, really good, refreshing to talk to somebody that was a thinker. And Adam had that in spades. And so that's, I think, the reason why our relationship over the course of the years, since the 90s, has never, ever dissolved. It's always been there. And there have been periods of time over the course of that length of time when we've connected. And within about 5 minutes, everybody's back up to speed. We know who we are, and we know what we're doing. And it's very cool. And so, and now this is the last iteration of what that connection is all about. Not the last, but the next iteration.
The next, that's right.
Exactly.
That's right, Bill. Let me tell the audience where who that young man was at that time. Right? I was a busboy at your restaurant, and not really going anywhere in life at that point. Didn't have any big plans at all. But I will tell you that one of the things that changed for me in working for you was that prior to that, I had let's just say a horrible work ethic. I had a work ethic much in line with much of my generation at that time. And then I got that job with you at your restaurant, and it was super standard. It was like 7 to 3, 5 days a week. And for the first time in my life, I actually knew what it was like to work for someone that I didn't want to let down. And I think that's that relationship part you were talking about.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think you were the first leader I ever worked for. And that got me there. That got me there on time, and they got me there 5 days a week, no matter what. And that really fundamentally changed my life. And a little later in the episode, I'll share with the audience what, the moment that things really changed for me in that relationship with you and how that affected the rest of my life. But for the time being, I'll leave it at that. And I'd like to for you to share with the audience some of the other inspirational things that have happened in your life, because people don't come to their purpose and find all the different avenues of their life's work without life happening. And you, my friend, have had plenty of things happen in your life that have inspired you down different paths in the world. Different ways of helping people, different ways of working with people, different causes over the years. And if you wouldn't mind sharing with the audience some of the experiences in your life that helped clarify those purposes for you?
Well, that's been a long journey, and it really started when I was a young man, probably in high school. I attended parochial school, and in the course of my parochial education, there were a lot of things that were coming at me, surrounded by a belief structure that I questioned. And, I think that's when I first started to realize that that's the kind of brain I had. It was like a questioning brain. And as I looked at all of the information that had been put into this mind of mine for, let's say, the first 12, 14, 15 years, I wondered whether or not that information was accurate. I was told that it was accurate, and I was also told that there was no other accuracy other than what I had been given. And so I got to a point where, because I asked questions, I got into trouble. And, I can remember one time when I was in high school, my father told me he'd been called in by the principal of the school, because they wanted to talk to him because they were having a problem with me. And I didn't think I was problematic. I mean, I wasn't starting any fights. I wasn't a bully. I was just trying to learn. And so my dad came in, I sat in the office outside while he went into the office with the principal and talked to the principal, and he came back out, and I got in the car and we're driving home, and he said, so the principal told me that, you're asking too many questions, and that you have to stop asking these questions because it distracts the teachers from the lessons that they want to teach. And so he said, the principal told me that if you didn't stop asking questions, that we're going to probably ask you to leave the school.
Wow.
And so I said, and so my dad said, I never realized how astute this man was when I was a young guy. He said, so what do you think you're going to do, son? And I said, well, Dad, I ask questions because I want answers. And when I don't get answers, I ask more questions. Somebody's got to give me an answer, and I'm not getting them. So I'm going to continue to ask questions until they throw me out. And my dad said, good, keep doing that, son. I got you. And he said, by the way, they're not going to throw you out. They needed tuition money.
Yes, right.
And I thought, oh yeah, that's pretty cool. So I think from that point on, I think that was kind of like a launch pad for being very inquisitive and looking for the bottom line logic that initiates this thinking. How is it that my brain is one physical entity, but the mind that's incorporated within that brain is something that changes all the time? And it changes based on what information is coming in. I know, and you know for a fact, that right from the very beginning, all of that programming that's done is done through our parents and people in our lives that have an impact on us. Obviously you were impacted by relationships in your life. And so those impacts are the things that I would stand back and say, why is it that this person in my life that's talking to me about these kinds of personal things, characteristics that I have, is so important to me? Why? And how is this going to propel me further to discover more about what my life is going to be about? I always saw my life as something that was evolving and would continue to evolve until the curtain came down. And I knew that right from the very beginning because of all of the different things that I got involved in, like early on, and like when I went to college and stuff. Those are the things that kind of propelled me forward to see that curtain is going to come down. And in that period of time, I need to be able to learn as much as I possibly can about who I am. Now they call it, I think, self-actualization. I wanted to find out who I actually was. And not only who I actually was, but is that actualization that I see in myself at 24 and at 30 and at 40, is that actualization that I see in myself? Is that going to stay the same, or are those threads of characteristics going to stay with me? And that actualization process is going to evolve. And that's exactly what has happened over the course of my life. It's been those kinds of changes to drive me in the direction of, first of all, shedding a lot of the stuff that was told me when I was a young man. That's hard to unwrap. You know, it's hard to get out of that, because that's stuff that's embedded right from the very beginning. It's almost like, you know, to use an analogy, how do you erase what's on a floppy disk? Well, now you just punch a button. But when you're talking about the human mind, it's called psychotherapy. And that's how you expunge all of that stuff that's been put in there that you are really not aware of, but you're just kind of acting it out in terms of your behavior. So, so it was like that. It was like that. It was that change of mindset. I had to find the courage to walk away from that religious experience and that religiosity that had been pounded into me. And the barrier that prevented me from walking out of that was fear. Because fear was the wall that was put around that brain of mine. And it was told that if you walk out of this, you're doomed. So that fear kept me locked into that mindset until I figured out that I didn't believe it, that I could in fact find the courage to be that different person and to walk out of that cell block that my brain was in and find another world and find another life and find another me. And that's what I did. And so since I did that, my life has been dramatically different. It's been open to every experience that comes in my direction. It's helped me become a better human being, a better man, a better husband, a better father. Every attribute that I could possibly put together that would make me a better self-actualized human being has happened since I walked away from that constraint that was put in my brain when I was a young man.
And from what I understand from you is that what you walked into was authenticity, and what you ran towards was authenticity.
Exactly. That's exactly it. It's very hard to determine what that authenticity looks like, because you think you're always being a pretty authentic person, just living the life and thinking the thoughts that you think in particular snapshots of your life. But that authenticity is an evolving issue, and it evolves based on the aging process and the experiential process that you have in your life as you move forward. All of those kinds of things and there are so many things, so many issues in your life, so many events in your life that take you down, and could destroy any sense and semblance of self-esteem that you might have. But if you have that attribute of, you know, it's funny, I look back over the course of my life and the issues that have impacted me and could have thrown me off the tracks dramatically. There was always that one little phrase that said, "This too shall pass." There will be tomorrow. Absolutely. There will be tomorrow. And I will be in that tomorrow unless I'm dead. And if I'm dead, it's irrelevant whether I'm there or not, because I'm not there and I'm not thinking about it. But this too shall pass. And I will be there tomorrow, moving in a direction that I can, in fact, define for myself. I just have to figure out what that's going to look like. And so that's kind of been the working towards that authenticity, working in that direction, to be the actualized human being that I think has been buried inside and it's come out little bits at a time.
It does come out little bits at a time. My professional background now is I've been a therapist now for 10 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, the mindset piece really is the biggest piece of the whole thing. Now, it sounds kind of cliche when you think about it as a therapist, right? It's all mindset, right? But that is missed. People come to me and they think, I need you to fix this part about me, right? And they come to me and they say things like, well, I'm suffering from anxiety. I'm suffering from depression, right? I'm suffering from ADHD. Well, all three of those things turn out in many cases to actually simply be the side effects of not having a purpose, not having drive, not having the tenacity, not having something to sink their teeth into, not having a purpose, and not actively seeking it.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, in our world, they find a psychiatrist or their primary care physician, and they get a lot of, they get some Xanax or they get some SSRIs or something like that. And on a really good day, right, those drugs can help with about 10-15% of what's going on. The reality is that it's here. It always was. And when you are at least seeking that authenticity, when you become the seeker of that purpose, when you become someone who is dialed into at least looking, something shifts in us as human beings. And I've had the pleasure of seeing many different people make that shift in my clinical work. And I've certainly seen it in the realm of the entrepreneur or the person who has certain sets of life experiences that impact them in such a way that they then pursue that. I was reading an article today about a woman whose life's work and purpose, she used the word purpose, right, was to support the introduction of like safe haven boxes for newborns. Apparently, there's laws in 22 states now that have allowed for those. Not all 22 states have them, but they're little boxes that are climate controlled and sensor alarmed for, and parents will actually bring their children there after birth. They're usually at police stations or fire stations or things like that. And she found that because that's what happened to her in 1973. And now that these laws are starting to be passed, she's found a purpose in working with that. Just tremendous. It was her own experience. It came from like literally the beginning of her life. And when I was reading that article, I was like, man, I gotta have that woman on the podcast. Right? She's got to share that experience with people so that people can learn. And that's the purpose of this podcast, so that people can learn to give themselves permission to find out for themselves as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the mitigating factors here is that we live in a culture that provides us an unbelievable amount of opportunities for distraction along that path of life. I used to believe that it was the accumulation of things that was an earmark of someone that was successful. It was the accumulator personality. And I never saw myself as the accumulator person. The driving force in my life, as I've come to learn over the course of my life, has always been to try to know people, to try to have people become part, to learn about their lives so that I can see how my life is a reflection of their life, or their life is a reflection of my life. How the struggles that they faced were essentially the kinds of struggles that I faced. You know, I've taught communication skills for 37 years. And teaching communication skills, what you learn is that most of us were taught very lousy communication skills. We weren't taught to listen. We were taught to hear, but we weren't taught to listen. We weren't taught to be assertive. We were taught to be authoritarian, or we were taught to be submissive. And all of those factors in terms of our upbringing were part and parcel of the personality that developed as we now become adults. And all of the behaviors that are associated with those personality issues come to us, and unconsciously we act out those behaviors, not thinking about what's the genesis of this behavior and how does this originate in me? Where does it come from? Those are things that, as I looked at other people and I talked with other people and explored other people and their lives and how they arrived at where they were, I would look at my own life and see, is part of this the representation of their life, part of what my life is all about? Yes, it is, absolutely. And where's the difference? How come, like, my life is here and their life is there? You know, it's interesting, Adam, because for a period of time, for about 2 years, when I was working my way through school, and this was prior to me knowing you, I worked in a closed psychiatric ward. And I used to work midnights. And so on midnights in that closed psychiatric ward, it was about 27 or 28 beds. We would have a vast array of people that had illnesses, just mental illnesses, just ways to, they didn't have coping skills for what was going on in their lives. And some of them actually had broken with consciousness and have become psychotic and, you know, were delusional. And so for a young man, I was like 22 or 23 years old in that period of time. This was an eye-opening experience for me. And I worked midnights. And so working midnights, when you work in a psychiatric ward like that, what happens is that you have opportunities to talk with a lot of people, because a lot of people are very agitated during the course of the night and they want to talk to somebody. And so I would always be available, because there were only 2 of us that worked midnights, the nurse and me. So I'd engage in conversation. And I can remember so many mornings walking out of that psych ward at 7 o'clock in the morning and thinking to myself, how is it that I get to walk out of here at 7 o'clock in the morning, when a lot of the stuff that I heard all night long from all of the people that I spoke with, all of the things that have happened to them in their lives that have brought them to this psych ward, to be in a psych ward, locked down. How is it that I get to leave? And most of what they talked to me about last night were issues that I'm dealing with, and they have to stay, and I get to go. What's the difference there? That took a lot of thought on my part when I was 22 or 23 to figure out what was the difference.
What difference did you find, Bill?
The difference that I found was ways to cope with the perceived disasters, the perceived inequities in everybody's lives. And the way I was taught to deal with those kinds of issues, that rather than allow those issues to overwhelm me and to paralyze me and to encapsulate me in fear and anxiety and all of that other stuff, I had somehow come to learn that tomorrow's another day, and that I will be able to, thinking through, I will be able to figure out another path I can walk down. I guess it was, as we're talking here, and I'm thinking through this thing, I guess I never reached the point where I felt that tomorrow was going to present to me a hopeless situation. Hope was always part of what the next day was going to hold for me. And I think that, I think about how that happened. And it was because there were so many things in my life previously and subsequent to that have demonstrated to me that it is true, that hope is what's alive tomorrow. And you're alive tomorrow. And if you can work with the hope that you come into that day with, to move in a different trajectory, to go in a different direction, then that's what you're going to do, because you have all of those other attributes. You have that tenacity and that stick-to-itiveness and that never giving up and, and fighting through it. I hate to use pugilistics as an example, but fighting through it from a personality perspective, the strengths, you bring everybody brings strengths and assets to their lives. And those strengths and assets have been developed historically over the course of what your life is all about. Some of those assets have now turned into strengths, and those strengths carry you through. Those are the strengths that will allow you to face tomorrow after a catastrophe today, will allow you to face tomorrow with the hope that things are going to change and that they're going to be changed because of the facilitation expertise that you've developed over the years to overcome these tragedies and move forward. A month before I was going to get married, my best man was killed in an accident. He was the closest thing to me to a brother that I ever had in my life. 2 months before he died in that accident, my mother died. 1965 and 66 were very, very traumatic psychological events for me. And I can remember thinking after we buried my friend that we can, in fact, I can move forward and be a better human being and reach out to all those people who were in my life at that time to help them become those better human beings they want to be. And that together we can figure out how to do that. But then, I'm a child of the 60s, civil rights, Vietnam War, all of that stuff. I was on the streets doing that. And so I always thought my generation was going to create the best possible world that all could live in. And as it's proven, some of my generation went astray. At least that's how I characterize it. I characterize it as they went astray. And I kind of wonder how that happened. So, and I still wonder how it happened.
No, Bill, I've been reading a book lately called 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel.
Uh-huh.
You may have heard of him. He
I have, yeah.
created a small company called PayPal.
Yeah, right, that guy.
And he was talking about the different types of pessimism and different types of optimism. For the sake of this conversation, we'll talk about the optimism. And he was talking about definite optimism. Right. The U.S. had definite optimism after World War II. By definite optimism, I mean even both sides of the political aisle were able to work together to formulate a vision and put together a plan and make things happen. Out of that, we got the interstate highway system. Out of that, we put a person on the moon. Right? In the 1970s, we went to what might be considered more of an indefinite optimism. A lot of people believed that things were still going to get better and better and better. But people stopped making plans.
Mm-hmm.
And without those plans, you get this drift.
Yeah.
And I think that sums up a lot of our country's experience in this time, and that culminated a lot in this country, in our politics, and in our drift away from those plans. Because let's face it, you've been in business. A mediocre plan is way better than no plan.
You're absolutely right. No plan gets no results. A
No
mediocre
plan, yeah.
plan may, in fact, get you mediocrity, but it will also provide you an opportunity as a springboard for even more than mediocrity. So that's the thing that's cool about it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And I see that as that's kind of I believe Peter was onto something when he kind of helped explain what happened, how that drift happened. And you know, we can't be faulted for expecting it to keep getting better and better and better.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of an interesting point, Adam, because, I've thought about that, there's endpoints in everything, okay? So where is the endpoint for better? And is better always defined as this is the best? Or no, it's part of the evolution. So then when you talk about better is in the mind's eye of the person who's experiencing the joy of whatever it is that they're experiencing at that time. This is better than anything that's ever happened to me before. But there is a potential for even better. So what's the end point? When does it get to the best? What would that look like? Not to move us in a different direction, but
I don't think that it's any different direction at all. In my work as a therapist, I did come across a pretty profound method to utilize the subconscious to identify and remove and release these trapped emotional energies that we have. And after doing all that work on myself and my loved ones and my clients, I realized that there is a definiteness to it, that the improvement was tangible and perfect in the sense that it was permanent. If you do that work, there's no substitute for it. There's no substitute for doing the work. You have to do the work. I tell my clients that all the time, whether it's in my coaching where I work with business owners and entrepreneurs to do that inner work, whether it's my counseling clients who just come to me with some anxiety and some depression, right? Or poor relationships, right? Whether it's the business people who say to me, I just want to break through my upper limits.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That type of inner work, there's no substitute for playing an active role in saving your own butt.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I can give you an example of that,
Okay.
So the very first restaurant that I was in, and I had partners, and those partners held a majority share of the ownership of the restaurant. And so for 5 years, I worked very, very diligently to build the reputation of the restaurant, build the business, et cetera. I was a hardworking person. You worked with me, you knew I was a hardworking person, right? Build the reputation. We built the reputation. The restaurant started to thrive. And my partners sold the restaurant out from under me. And the only way I found out about it was when the attorney called me on the phone and said, be in my office tomorrow with your wife because the restaurant no longer belongs to you. It has now been sold to somebody else at the behest of your partners who own controlling interest.
Wow.
That was quite a shock because my whole life was in that restaurant. Everything I was working towards was in that restaurant, the health of my family, everything that I was envisioning as my future. Tomorrow is going to be another day, and the next day, etc. So I had that vision, and this restaurant was going to work in that direction to compel me to move into that future, was now gone. And so I can remember coming home, first of all, to explain to my wife that we no longer had a restaurant, that we were no longer owners of a restaurant. And then to explain to my children who had worked in that restaurant very, very diligently, very, very hard. They were so supportive of making the restaurant successful, and their personalities just blossomed in that restaurant. And to let my children know that starting tomorrow, there would be no income coming into this household. to pay our bills. And so actually, when I was explaining that to the kids, I was crying because I was emotionally devastated. I would actually have to tell my kids that the dream that I had, that hopefully I was infusing in my own children, was now destroyed. So it was a huge blow to my psyche, to my ability to provide, which of course is part of that whole masculine identification thing. And so, that was very traumatic. And the thing that was uplifting was that I said to my kids, you're going to have to find jobs, and the money that you make in those jobs, you're going to have to give to mom and I, at least for an interim period of time, so that we can pay the bills and stay in our house. I will find something else to do because I have skills and I can parlay those skills into a job, but it's going to take time. And my kids, all three of them said, whatever you want us to do, Dad, not a problem. I thought, wow, that was unbelievably gracious of my children to do that. And they didn't even know they were being that way. It was just like, well, of course, whatever we have to do as a family, we will do this. And
I
so,
worked with your children. I could totally see them doing that.
Exactly. Them, right? And so that's what we did. And so, and then I was out of that business for a couple of years and then went back into it and was very successful in the second time around in a restaurant that lasted about 13 years. That was the one that you worked at. That was Mr. Bill's. So. And that was something that I was very proud of. That restaurant worked really well. And you know what it did? It's amazing, Adam, because, I'm working in the restaurant business and I'm also teaching communication skills, right? So when you teach communication skills, you actually have to know those communication skills. You have to know how they work. Okay. Like, what's the difference between listening and hearing? Okay. What's the difference between being an authoritarian dictator and somebody that advocates for, maybe genuine uplifting and encouragement? And, when you're raised in an environment like, most of us were raised in a critical environment, we were told that if you stop doing this, you'll be better. And if you stop doing this, you'll be better. And you'll be better if you stop doing this. And you can't do that because that will detract from you getting better. So we were all fed these negative kind of self-images. And then we grow up to be adults. And then all of a sudden we portray these negative self-images through our behavior. And we can't figure out why that's going on, right? And I remember in my classes, I used to say to people, how many in this room, I used to have probably about 30, 35 people in the classroom. How many in this room can remember their parents saying to them or these significant people in their lives? How many times do I have to tell you, you can't do that? When are you going to learn? I know you can do better. All of those kinds of classic cliches that denigrate and debase somebody's building of their own, self-esteem. Everybody in the classroom is raising your hands. Yep, that's me. Yep, that's me. That's how I was. That's how my dad was. That's how my mom was. And then I would say to them, so how many people in this class can remember anybody in your life, even if it's just one person, that said to you, I don't see you that way. This is how I see you. These are the things I see in you. Who was that person that gave you a different picture of the picture that you already had embedded in your brain? And all of a sudden, you'd see them sitting there thinking, and then you'd see somebody cautiously raising their hand, and somebody would say, it was my grandmother. It was my grandfather. Those are the people that saved me from all of this negative stuff that came in. They saved me. And I saw myself for the first time as a different human being. I wasn't this person who was a complete screw up. I was somebody that had assets that could lead me into my life and help me be the best person I can be and live the best life I possibly can live. And it had to change. And it was a perceptual change. And that was part of what I was doing in the restaurant. I was learning how those skills worked. I was practicing on the staff. I probably practiced on you. I'm sure I did.
Oh, we'll get to that.
And then also, it's really funny because I remember walking around the restaurant. I was trying to figure out how to listen more effectively, and it all had to do with, people sitting in a booth and one person's talking to the other person and the other person's talking back. And as soon as this person stops talking and the other person starts talking back to them, you realize this person over here that's now talking didn't listen to a thing that the other person had said, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Lots of that
because all the
going around.
time this person was talking to them, they were formulating an answer to whatever it was that that person was talking about, right? So they really didn't listen, So they heard, but they didn't listen. So I used to practice that. I used to stand by the booths, I'd be looking around and, all the people in the restaurant, it was a busy restaurant, that. And so all people are watching and they know that, I'm probably watching how, the service is going, the food's coming out of the kitchen. When really what I was doing was eavesdropping on everybody's conversation so that I could learn how to become a more effective listener in my own life. So it was like a clinical trial in that restaurant for me to become a better communicator. It worked out quite well from what I can see so far. It's worked out quite well. Yeah.
Bill, you were the guy who would float around. I would see you floating around at lunchtime. And of course, you had your diehard regulars there.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I'd see you floating around, and you would just walk right up, and you'd sit down with that couple or that group of friends that comes in there and has their lunch, and big smile on your face. And there was no doubt about what I was seeing. You were actively listening to them. You had in your countenance a genuine interest in them.
And it's true. It was, and that's exactly the way to put it too, Adam. I agree with that 100%. It was a genuine interest in understanding and learning about who these people were. And one of the things that I did that I was kind of most proud of when I was in the restaurant was, you and I both know men have a very, very difficult time using a vocabulary that has feeling words in it.
Mm.
Okay? I can remember my wife, after 10 or 15 years of marriage, she said to me one time, Bill, it's really getting kind of tiresome. When I ask you how you feel, you tell me I could feel okay, I feel bad, I feel fine. You have 4 or 5 comments about your physiological state, but you never tell me how you feel. And I thought, what are you talking about? What kind of language is that? Because I didn't have that vocabulary. When I started to teach communication skills, I had to learn that vocabulary because that was really the vocabulary that people were responding to. Those were the messages that were being sent between the lines of communication. That was the angst, the anxiety, the fear, the apprehension, the love, the sadness. All of those feelings were coming through between the lines of communication. And I was missing them. I was completely missing them. And that's what I did in that restaurant was I refined my skills to actually hear that and to start to use that vocabulary. And so then, as an experiment, I would sit down with some of the guys that would come in because I wanted to develop close relationships with a lot of the guys who were typically kind of macho dudes, that would come in the restaurant. And I can remember very specifically in the course of conversations with a lot of these guys to start to use words that typically guys don't talk about. I would talk about my life, and I talk about things that are going on with the kids or with my parents or whatever. And I would use words like sad or confused or hurt or stressed. And I would use feeling words to the fullest extent that the conversation would allow me to do that. And I expected to get sort of a kind of a strange look from those guys, but as it happened, they started to feel comfortable in using the same language so that they would come in and they would sit down. Some of them would say, hey, come on, sit down, man. Let's have a quick conversation. We start talking and they would start telling me about something that's going on in their private life with their girlfriend, with their wife, with their kids, etc. And inevitably, they would start to use words like sad, confused, all of those kinds of feeling words, and there are so many, that previously they didn't feel comfortable in using because they were talking to another guy and they didn't want it to be misconstrued. And that was the basis of the reason why they talked the way they did prior to that. But with me, because I allowed them to do that by exposing my own vulnerabilities to them, they started to feel comfortable with that. And that was pretty cool. I thought that was really cool. I wanted to stay in that restaurant for a long time so that I could continue to do that. But then the whimsies of life took me in a different direction.
And it will.
Yes, it will.
You know, there are so many emotional states that once we understand what they are, once we understand what the definitions are, we know the difference between anger and bitterness.
Right.
And
Yeah.
frustration.
Right.
Right. There are big differences between those.
Yeah.
If you can't define those, you can't express them or name them. I've been telling my therapy clients for years, right? Once you can name something, once you can name an emotion, you own it, ceases to have all that power over you. And now with my work with coaching and business owners, it's the same thing. It's all just a process of naming it. Oh, so it's abandonment. Oh, so it's humiliation.
Exactly.
Right. Oh, so it's helplessness.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, you're wishy-washy. Can't really make a decision here, right?
Exactly.
Once you can name it, then you've got it, right?
Yeah.
And let me tell you an experience I had at your restaurant with that, right? Because you totally did that with me. And one day, I've been working for you for a little, probably about a year at that point, and frankly, I was making kind of decent money at the time, especially for just bussing tables. It was great in the early 90s. And one day I was sitting down for lunch having my meal, and you plopped down in the booth across from me, and you looked at me, and a young 20-year-old, and you said, Adam, what the hell are you still doing working for me? And that was my young 20s, something like, my response was something like, what? Right? I mean, I love the job, I didn't love the 7 o'clock in the morning. I'll admit that, but I did love that job. I loved working for you. I loved working with your kids. I loved the whole thing. The clients, the customers were great too. And I said, well, what do you mean, Bill? And you said, listen, he says, you said, you're smart. You like people. You're good with people. He said, and you can kind of put a story together, right? You can communicate something. And he says, why aren't you like, I don't know, at least off in college? And I didn't have an answer for you right there, but I mulled that over that night. It's kind of stuck in my gullet, right? Coming from a working class family, there wasn't a lot of ambition. Both my father, both my mother, divorced, but both had kind of safe, secure jobs with the state or utilities. So I'd never really considered it, right? I kind of had this notion that maybe I'd go and I'd learn a trade or something like that, but that was probably a pipe dream. So I mulled that over. And then further on in that conversation, you said, I went to school up in Traverse City. And you told me a great story about one night out on the peninsula where you rolled a VW microbus.
No, it was a bug.
It was a bug. Okay. Ooh,
Yeah.
hard to roll one of those. Wow.
It is. It's very hard to do that. It's an achievement, I'll tell you.
It's an achievement, yeah. And I had just gone up there recently that winter, and I loved it. And it turns out that I took stock of everything, right? And I was running with some bad crew at the time. And so I thought, well, Traverse City's 4.5 hours away. That's far enough. Maybe I get away from those bad influences and take the advice of an obviously good influence. and I applied at the community college, right? Obviously got accepted, and that was the end of that. And that did it. And it got me away from all those bad influences. And I remember even coming down a few times on my when the restaurant was still open on my Christmas break and doing a little work bussing tables for you.
Exactly.
And tell me, Bill, how many I don't know if you probably don't know how many times you had a conversation like that with somebody in that restaurant, but tell me how many advanced degrees you know of came out of your restaurant.
I know of 6 PhDs that came out of that restaurant. Matter of fact, right now, you'd be interested, I think. There's a woman that came in when she was 16 years old as a waitress. And she was like you. You know, I mean, the restaurant business is a training business for young kids. They come in, they either learn what work is all about and teamwork and working with other people, or they don't. Okay. And so there were select young people that came through that restaurant, whether it was the Ramshorn that I had prior to that, or whether it was Mr. Bill's that came through, that were essentially a different, cut out of a different cloth. Okay. And one of the criteria that I had when I was working with these young people was, how did they think? They're in an environment now, and that environment takes awareness, who you are, where you are, what you're doing, who other people are that you're working with, what are they doing? How can you work together as a group? How can you work out the strategy of delivering what we are there for, which is the best food, the best service as efficiently as we possibly can? And how do you think through that? You know, are there things that can be changed? Can you provide insight from your perspective on how we could change things? And so there were very few people that came through that restaurant that had that insight. You were one of them. And right now, I'm working with that 16-year-old waitress that came in the 90s, who is now in her, I don't know, late 40s. She is a PhD at Wayne State University. She runs the autism program at Wayne State University. Her and I are working on developing programs to teach parents of neurotypical children and parents of neuroatypical children effective ways to deal with their children. And Krista is going to do the neuroatypical because she works with that IDD environment. And I'm going to do the neurotypical ones because I've been doing that for 37 years. So her and I have submitted a couple of applications now to funding organizations and got shot down from these 2 different funding organizations. But we're working with an organization called Brilliant Detroit, which buys homes in beaten down neighborhoods in the city of Detroit, buys these homes and converts them into early childhood learning centers. And then they bring children in from 0 to 8, and they teach these kids how to be at grade level when they start school. And they give them the technology that they're going to need to have so that they're not behind when they start. And so she's a perfect example of one of the PhDs that came through the restaurant, ended up working in Chicago at one of the nuclear labs in Chicago. God, I just can't tell you how many people came through there, but they all had that different, there were attributes that they had that they demonstrated that were cut out of a different cloth. And I could see that. And those are the ones that I wanted to encourage to see it in themselves, Adam. That's what I wanted you to see. I wanted you to see it in yourself, not me. That's, you know, that was one of the things I learned in communication skills was, you know, I'm not going to tell you what I see you are. I want you to see who you are. And I'm going to point out the things that I see in you that may lead you to know the kind of person you are and what you can be. Those are the things that I want to do. That's the difference between me being an encouraging human being and me being one of those human beings that says, nice job, way to go, I'm glad you did. You know, the difference between encouragement and praise is a very different focus. And that has been so extremely helpful for me in terms of understanding human beings. I can always look at a human being and see whether or not they had encouragement in their life or whether they were discouraged in their lives. And you were that kid. You were that kid. You were like, when I looked at you and I listened to you and we talked and you talked to me about, about your vision and what you saw in me, what I saw in you was there's hope for the future. Yeah.
Well, something shifted in that day when you had that conversation with me.
Yeah.
And that has been paid forward by so many magnitudes.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's when we find, right? Like you've had, you were, you had people in your family, right? With developmental
Disabilities.
challenges.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
My grandson. Yeah.
Yeah. And, and so then you looked for a way to amplify the goodness of that.
Exactly right. That's a great characterization. Yep.
And I feel like when people are looking for their life's work, what you want to look for is you want to look for some way to magnify something in a positive way. We all have trying experiences. Okay. Nobody gets out of their childhood without trauma. Hey,
Not at all.
I have a 6-year-old. In the absence of actual trauma, he will just make up his own. Absolutely, without fail, right? And so, we all have these traumatic childhoods, and then adolescence is kind of where we live out the drama from that trauma.
Yeah.
And then adulthood is when we can channel that. Adulthood is when we've done that inner work. And once we've done that inner work, we know how we can take that trauma, we can find what it taught us, and then magnify that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's a superb characterization, Adam. I agree with that 100%. It is just magnifying something that's already inside of you, but the light that's inside of you has not shone on that characteristic that you have. Not bright enough so that you can see it as a light that I might be able to move in the direction of. But once you see that, once you understand that, when I was doing communication skills and I was teaching the difference between encouragement and praise, there was a little CD that we used to use, and it was a mom and a dad talking to a kid that comes home from like 6th grade or whatever, and the dad's going through all of the stuff that he got, from the teacher when they went to parent-teacher conference, and the dad is going through everything that the kid screwed up. Well, you got a D here, you got a C here, you got a 20% here, on and on and on and on. And this art stuff, that's really irrelevant, and then you get this 82, you get an 82 or an 86 or something, and the dad's comment on it, this is where you should be. This is what you should be doing. I mean, I know you can do better. So the message, and I know you can do better, is you're not good enough. You're not doing good enough, and and I'm unwilling to accept this, right? So when we look at that, and then we say, well, what could be encouraging here? Well, you could go through the same set of things, same set of scores, et cetera, et cetera. Kid comes home with an 86 on a spelling test, and instead of saying, I don't understand why you couldn't get 100 on that, which I have to honestly say, I did that to Owen, my second oldest son. I actually did that. And that was a turning point in my life to make me understand how screwed up I was when I was looking at grades. Okay. Anyways, the focus was, here's an 86. I know you were studying really hard. I saw you studying really hard. And I know that this is what you're attempting to achieve because I can see how hard you studied here. And when what the message was there, I see you, I understand you, I know how hard you're working, you're tenacious, and I have confidence in your ability to get it done. Boom.
That's a high five right there.
That's a high five right there, Adam. Exactly. That's encouraging, because all of a sudden, instead of judging your kid as being incapable, what you're now doing is reaching inside that kid's brain and you're turning on that light switch and you're saying, this is who you are that I see. I hope you see the same things, because I have confidence in you. That's a critical juncture in bringing a child to a point where they see themselves in a positive light. That's the thing my dad said to me in the car when we were coming home from school. I got you. I got your back. Don't worry about it. You continue to ask questions, because I know you need answers, and I hope you find them, and I'll support you. What more could you ask for? That's a cool dude. Even my kids say he was a cool dude. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, Bill. Well, I think we're going to kind of wrap this up here.
Okay.
I'd first off like to thank you again for showing up here today and sharing this and sharing really when I look at the totality of the things that you have done and the ways that you have magnified the good that has come from the arguably not so good in your life. You know, I just want to remind our audience that you barely scratched the surface of this.
Well, we can come back at this some other time. So.
That sounds wonderful.
Okay.
And I'd like to remind our audience that if you got some value from this today, I hope that value is that you can find ways to give yourself permission to find your life's work, find your passion, magnify the good that can come from anything you've been through and anything that you've learned, and share that with the world. Don't be shy about that, right? You know, the negative results of not doing that, you know, are the things that so many people suffer from: anxiety, depression, things like that. We want your light to shine upon the world.
Absolutely.
And do not hide it from the world. And again, if you got value from this today, I encourage you to you know, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, share this with a friend who you feel needs to hear this. And we will be posting one of these at the first of every month. So again, Bill, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the inaugural run. I really appreciate the opportunity, Adam.